Christmas Eve, a billionaire CEO looked down from his penthouse and saw something that would change his life forever. A maid, a single mother of twins, searching through the trash just to keep her children alive. What began as an act of compassion soon turned into a battle for love, family, and survival against a world determined to tear them apart. This is a story of hope rising from despair, of second chances, and of how love can be found in the most unexpected places. If you believe in stories where kindness can change destinies, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss the next chapter. The Chicago night was merciless. A December wind cutting through steel and glass as though the city itself wanted to remind everyone who was in charge. 29 floors above the street, Ethan Cole stood alone on his penthouse balcony, hands wrapped around the railing, his breath frosting in the air. It was Christmas Eve and the skyline twinkled with a million festive lights, yet he felt none of it. To him, the world was just noise. Parties, family obligations, business dinners that blurred together. The weight of being young, wealthy, and constantly watched had hollowed him out until even the holidays seemed pointless. He almost went back inside, back to the silence of his perfect but lifeless apartment, when movement below caught his eye. At first he thought it was just another late-night delivery or a stray dog scrounging for scraps. But the security lights shifted, revealing the truth. A woman was bent over the dumpster at the edge of the parking lot, her thin frame trembling in the cold as she sorted through trash bags with desperate speed. For a moment, Ethan couldn't process it. No one should have been down there in this weather, least of all someone searching garbage for food. Then he saw the car parked nearby, its windows fogged from breath inside. Two small faces pressed against the glass, eyes wide and too solemn for their age, watching their mother fight the night for their survival. Ethan's chest tightened. He recognized her, Maria Alvarez. He had seen her countless times in the lobby of his building, wearing the uniform of the cleaning service. Always early, always efficient, always invisible. He had never spoken more than a polite good evening, never wondered what her life looked like when she left. Now he was staring straight into it, and it was nothing like he imagined. The idea of going back inside to his expensive bottle of scotch and curated loneliness suddenly felt obscene. Below, Maria's hand shook as she pulled out a container of untouched roast beef. Still sealed, discarded hours earlier after a holiday party in the building. She tucked it carefully into a worn tote bag already filled with rolls and mashed potatoes she had salvaged. Ethan could almost hear her whispering reassurance to herself. To the children watching. Almost done. Almost there. The words made the air heavier, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Then came the sound of footsteps crunching on ice. Maria stiffened, panic flashing across her face. She thought it was security. Thought the last shred of stability she had, a job cleaning the building, was about to vanish. Her lips parted to beg for mercy, but no words came. The figure that emerged from the shadows wasn't a guard. It was Ethan Cole, the man whose name she had cleaned from plaques in the lobby, the man whose world she had dusted and vacuumed without ever belonging to it. Their eyes met across the frozen distance. Maria's mask of quiet endurance cracked, revealing the raw terror of a mother cornered. Ethan saw it all, the weight of hunger, the sleepless nights, the impossible choices that had led her here. And in that instant, the narrative of his life shifted. He was no longer just a CEO detached from the struggles of the people around him. He was a witness to something unbearable, something he could not turn away from. His voice came low, almost uncertain, carried by the winter air. "Your kids," he said, glancing toward the fogged car. "How long have they been sitting in there?" Maria swallowed hard before answering, her words trembling but clear. 4 hours. It's warmer than our apartment. The heat was cut yesterday. The admission hung in the air like a verdict. Ethan felt the shopping bags in his hands grow impossibly heavy. Inside were last-minute gifts he'd bought out of obligation, expensive trinkets for people who had no real needs. For the first time in years, his wealth felt like a chain instead of a shield. He looked back at Maria, really looked at her, and something inside him shifted. This night, this moment, would not end the way the world expected. He took a step closer, his breath visible in the freezing air, and said words that surprised even him. "Get your children. You're all coming upstairs now." Maria froze, torn between fear and disbelief as the man she thought untouchable opened a door to a world she never dared imagine. and above them the city lights glittered like silent witnesses to the choice that would change all of their lives forever. The elevator ride was silent, the kind of silence that pressed on the chest like a weight. Maria held her twins close as though they might vanish if she let go, her worn jacket wrapped around their shivering shoulders. Emma and Elias, 7 years old, eyes wide with both wonder and fear, clung to her sides, stealing glances at the tall man beside them. Ethan Cole stood still, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his coat, his jaw set, his mind racing faster than the elevator's quiet ascent. He had acted on instinct downstairs, blurting out words he hadn't planned, "Come upstairs now." But as the glowing numbers ticked higher, doubt gnawed at him. What was he doing? A billionaire CEO bringing a maid and her children into his penthouse in the middle of the night. What would people say if they found out? His board of directors would call him reckless. His mother would call him insane. Yet none of that mattered in the moment. All he could think about was the way Maria had looked up at him in the freezing dark, pride stripped bare, dignity crumbling, and still fighting for her children. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the vast marble foyer of Ethan's penthouse. Warmth washed over them instantly. Maria gasped before she could stop herself. The children's tiny breaths fogged in the air as they stepped out, their heads tilting back to take in ceilings higher than any house they had ever lived in. The twinkling lights of Chicago glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, a cityscape that looked like a galaxy laid out just for them. "Stay here," Maria whispered urgently, her fingers tightening on their shoulders as if the shine of this place might burn them. But the twins were already moving forward, drawn like moths to the glow of a space they couldn't comprehend. Ethan shrugged off his coat, setting it across a chair with deliberate calm. "You're safe here," he said, his voice lower than before. "No one's going to throw you out. Sit, please." Maria's legs wobbled as she guided Emma and Elias to the kitchen island. She couldn't stop trembling, partly from cold, mostly from fear. She had spent years teaching her children to be invisible, to survive by going unnoticed. Now they sat on bar stools that gleamed like they had never been touched, their wide eyes fixed on appliances they didn't know the names of. Ethan moved with a purpose that surprised even himself. He pulled down mugs, white porcelain, gifts from some corporate retreat he'd never cared about, and dusted off the cocoa maker tucked into the corner, still in its packaging. His fingers fumbled with it, not from ignorance but from the storm raging inside him. "I've seen her every week for a year. How did I never see her?" The rich smell of chocolate began to fill the air, and when Ethan turned, he found the twins watching him, their eyes filled with something he hadn't expected. Hope. "Would hot chocolate be okay?" he asked carefully. Emma looked at her mother for permission, then gave a small, hesitant nod. Elias's lips parted in the faintest smile, the first Ethan had seen. He placed the mugs in their small hands, porcelain dwarfing their fingers. The sight pierced him. These children were holding cups worth more than what Maria probably made in a week, and yet they looked at them as though he had handed them the moon. Maria's voice broke the moment. "Mr. Cole," she began softly, her words trembling. "We can't—" Ethan turned to her, cutting her off with a look that was not unkind but unyielding. "It's Christmas. Your children are hungry. Let them be children tonight." For the first time, Maria met his eyes without lowering her gaze. There was defiance there, but also exhaustion, the kind that lived in her bones. She wanted to argue, to insist on her pride, but Emma's small laugh stopped her. Her daughter giggled as the foam of the chocolate clung to her upper lip. Elias grinned, nudging her, and suddenly both were laughing. Soft, fragile laughter that sounded like salvation. Ethan felt something in his chest fracture. He hadn't heard laughter in this apartment in years, not since he was a boy. His own childhood had been gilded with luxury but hollowed out by silence. Seeing joy here again made the walls seem less like prison bars and more like home. He busied himself reheating food from his refrigerator, steak, vegetables, dishes he rarely touched. As he set the plates before the children, Maria's trembling grew worse. She whispered to him, her voice so quiet it barely reached his ears. "You don't know what this means to them. To me?" Ethan turned back to her, something fierce sparking in his voice.
"No, you don't know what this means to me." For the first time, Maria faltered.
She searched his face, looking for mockery, for pity, but found neither. There was only raw truth. Outside the window, snow began to fall. tiny flakes drifting against the glass like stars breaking loose from the sky. Inside, the sound of children eating, giggling, and whispering filled the penthouse. And Ethan Cole, who had built his life on steel walls and silence, realized this night was not about charity. It was about a door opening that could never be shut again, and deep down, Maria knew it too. She had come here with empty hands, scavenging trash in the freezing dark. But what frightened her more than anything else was the flicker of a thought she couldn't push away. Maybe, just maybe, her life had shifted forever in the span of a single night. Maria sat at the marble island, her hands folded tightly together, as though she could hold back the tremor in her fingers if she gripped hard enough. The twins were still giggling, their bellies full for the first time in days, their small hands clutching forks that gleamed under the warm kitchen lights. They didn't belong here. She knew it. Every fiber of her being screamed it. But tonight, for the first time in years, her children weren't cold or hungry. And that was a miracle she couldn't deny. Ethan leaned against the counter, watching them with a strange expression, as though trying to memorize every detail. The way Emma tucked her hair behind her ear like a little adult. The way Elias hummed while he ate, almost afraid the food would vanish if he didn't savor every second. He had sat across boardroom tables worth millions, had signed contracts that could shift markets, but nothing had ever struck him with the force of this moment. These were children laughing in his kitchen, and he realized with a kind of bone-deep clarity that he had never understood what wealth was for until now. Maria noticed his gaze and felt her stomach clench. She was used to being invisible. She preferred it that way. When the wealthy looked at her, it was usually through glass walls, as if she were just another part of the background. A worker, a uniform, a function. But Ethan was seeing her, really seeing her, and it unsettled her more than the cold outside ever could. She cleared her throat softly. "Mr. Cole, we should go." The words caught him off guard. "Go, it's past midnight. Where would you go?" She straightened, the familiar armor of her pride snapping back into place. "Home, or what's left of it." She forced a tight smile. "We can't stay here. This isn't our world." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't move closer. He simply asked, his voice steady, "Then tell me what your world is, Maria. Tell me why you were outside digging through trash when you've been working here cleaning my building, twice a week for over a year." The silence that followed was heavier than the winter outside. Maria felt the weight of his stare pressing her, dragging up truths she had buried so deep they had become scars. She wanted to lie, to brush him off, to protect herself from the vulnerability of being exposed. But her children's laughter was still ringing in the air, fragile and beautiful, and she couldn't lie in front of that. So she spoke. "I have a degree," she said, her voice brittle. "Business administration. Top of my class. I had plans, real ones. A good job lined up, a future that looked solid. Then life happened. I met Daniel and I thought love was enough. We married too young, had the twins before we were ready. He swore he'd take care of us. Instead, he left when they were 4. Left us with debt I'm still paying off. Since then, it's been survival." Her voice cracked, but she pushed on. "Every time I get ahead, something happens. The car breaks down. One of the kids gets sick. Hours get cut at work. I clean offices, I scrub floors, I do everything I can, but it's never enough. 3 weeks ago, the heat was shut off. Tonight, I couldn't let my children wake up to nothing on Christmas morning. So I swallowed my pride and went through the trash because sometimes dignity doesn't keep kids alive." The words spilled into the kitchen like broken glass. Emma and Elias had grown quiet, sensing the heaviness in their mother's voice. Ethan stood frozen, each syllable sinking into him like stones. He thought of his own life. Complaints about boardroom politics, the suffocation of social events, the loneliness he wore like a badge of suffering. And he felt ashamed. He drew a breath, sharp and deliberate. 3 weeks without heat? You've been living like that while I... He trailed off, shaking his head. While I wasted my life on problems that weren't problems. Maria flinched, suddenly fearful. She had said too much. His pity would be worse than silence. "We'll leave in the morning," she whispered quickly, desperate to pull back before he could offer sympathy that would cut her deeper than hunger ever had. But Ethan stepped forward now, his voice firm with a kind of authority he had never used outside a boardroom. "No, that ends tonight. Your children will never sleep cold again. Not while I have anything to say about it. Suspense thickened in the air, a dangerous promise hanging between them. Maria's heart pounded. She wanted to believe him, wanted to collapse into the safety he offered, but she had been burned too many times before. Could she risk trusting a man whose world had never touched hers until tonight? Ethan looked at the twins, their heads resting against each other now, heavy with sleep. He softened. I don't know what tomorrow looks like, Maria, but I know this. Your kids deserve better. And so do you. Let me help. Maria's eyes burned, though she refused to let tears fall. Her entire life had taught her to distrust easy kindness, to run from promises that sounded too good to be true. But staring at her children, warm and safe for the first time in weeks, she realized she had no choice. Outside, snow pressed against the windows in a silent storm. Inside, something deeper was stirring, a collision of two worlds that should never have touched, but now could never be separated. The first light of Christmas morning crept across the Chicago skyline, pale gold spilling through the glass walls of Ethan Cole's penthouse. The city below was quiet, muffled by a blanket of new snow. Inside, the silence was broken by the sound of small feet pounding down the polished hallway. Emma's gasp came first, sharp and bright as she skidded to a halt in the living room. Mommy, come look!" Elias followed, his eyes going wide, his mouth falling open as though he had stumbled into a fairy tale. There, in the corner where last night there had been nothing but glass and cold emptiness, stood a towering Fraser fir, strung with golden lights that glittered like stars. Beneath it, wrapped in paper and ribbon, lay a mountain of presents. Toys, books, clothes, more than the children had ever seen in their lives. Maria's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't heard her daughter sound like that, so alive, so full of wonder, in years. She clutched the doorway, torn between awe and dread. She hadn't slept much. Even wrapped in warmth, in sheets softer than anything she owned, her mind had raced. Fear of what came next, fear of owing too much, fear of hope itself. Ethan stood in the kitchen doorway, a mug of coffee in his hand, watching the scene unfold. He had been awake all night, driven by something he couldn't explain. Sometime after Maria carried her sleeping children into the guest rooms, he had put on his coat, braved the icy streets, and bought everything. The tree, the decorations, the gifts. He hadn't even cared about the cost. It was the first time money felt like it had purpose. He cleared his throat and the twins turned, eyes shining. Emma whispered to her brother, "Do you think Santa found us here?" Elias shrugged, but there was a smile tugging at his lips. Maria turned slowly, her gaze locking on Ethan. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly, her voice thick with emotions she couldn't name. Ethan took a sip of his coffee, his eyes steady on hers. "Actually, I did." Maria's throat tightened. She wanted to be angry, to protect her pride, but her children were already kneeling by the tree, hesitant hands hovering over packages as if afraid the magic might vanish if they touched it. She couldn't take this from them. "Not today. Open them," Ethan said gently, crouching beside them. "They're for you." Emma's small fingers tugged at a ribbon until it came loose. Inside was a set of paints, the kind she had dreamed of every time she borrowed broken crayons from school. She looked up at him, her eyes so bright they nearly broke him. "For me?" He nodded. "For you." Elias tore the paper off a box to reveal a model airplane kit. His hand shook with excitement. "Can I build it today?" "Of course," Ethan said, smiling for the first time in days. Maria sank onto the couch, her legs unable to hold her. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to hide the tears. She hadn't seen her children smile like this since before Daniel left. Since before the world collapsed around them. Ethan's voice pulled her back. "I need to tell you something." She looked up sharply, her heart pounding at the sudden seriousness in his tone. He set his coffee aside and reached for a folder lying on the table. It looked out of place here, too formal for this Christmas morning. "I stayed up last night," he said. "Not shopping, researching." Maria's stomach dropped. "Researching what?" "You." He held the folder out to her. "Your records, your degree, your jobs, everything I could find. It all checks out, Maria. You were top of your class. Full scholarship. You should have had a career, not this." He gestured at the cleaning uniform folded neatly on a chair. Her face burned. "You looked into me?" Ethan didn't flinch. "I had to. Not because I don't believe you, but because I realized I've been blind. You've been here right in front of me, fighting to survive while I lived above it all. I had to know how the system failed you." She shook her head, her voice trembling. I don't want pity. This isn't pity. His voice sharpened, filled with something fierce. He slid the folder closer. It's opportunity. One of my companies, Sterling Technologies, has been looking for an office manager. The position's been open for months. Full benefits, childcare on site, real pay. $48,000 to start. You're qualified. More than qualified. Maria stared at the paper as though it were a weapon. A real salary. Insurance. Stability. It was everything she had prayed for, everything she had told herself was out of reach. And yet it terrified her, because nothing in her life had ever come without strings. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this for me? Ethan's eyes softened, but his voice carried the weight of a vow. Because I saw you last night risk everything for your children. Because I saw 2 kids who deserve better than a broken system. And because I'm tired of wasting the power I've been given. The twins, oblivious to the storm between their mother and Ethan, squealed with delight as they uncovered more gifts. Their joy filled the room, but Maria sat frozen, torn between gratitude and suspicion, fear and longing. For the first time in years, the future didn't look like a dark tunnel with no exit. It looked like possibility, but possibility was dangerous. It meant hope. And hope, in Maria's experience, was the cruelest thing of all. She closed the folder slowly, her eyes never leaving Ethan's. If I say yes, she murmured. Everything changes. Ethan leaned closer, his gaze unflinching. That's the point. The clock ticked softly on the wall, marking the exact moment when the life Maria Alvarez had known began to unravel. Whether for salvation or destruction, she didn't yet know. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and relentless, as if the world itself was rewriting her story. The courthouse smelled of old paper and desperation, the kind of air that clung to people who had been fighting battles here for too many years. Maria sat at the long wooden table, her palms damp despite the chill. Emma and Elias were not with her. Ethan had arranged for them to stay with a trusted assistant in the waiting room down the hall. She could hear faint echoes of laughter through the thick doors, but here in this chamber there was no laughter, only judgment. Across the aisle sat Daniel, the man who had once sworn he'd be her forever. He was polished for the occasion, his hair slicked back, his suit too new, the scent of cologne drowning the reality of who he was. But Maria saw through the costume, the tremor in his hands, the glassiness in his eyes. He was hiding the same demons that had torn their family apart years ago. Still he smiled at her, the kind of smile that had once charmed her, and it made her stomach turn. Your Honor, his lawyer began smoothly. My client has made mistakes, yes, but he has worked hard to rebuild his life. He seeks joint custody of his children, because every child deserves a father. Ms. Alvarez has denied him that right. The words sliced through Maria. She gripped the table to steady herself. Denied him? She remembered the nights he didn't come home, the debts he left behind, the mornings the twins woke hungry because their father had gambled away their last savings. He had denied himself. Yet here he sat, cloaked in legal rhetoric, playing the part of the devoted father. Maria's lawyer, sharp and unflinching, rose to speak. Your Honor, my client has not denied Mr. Alvarez access. Mr. Alvarez abandoned his family. He has provided no child support, no stable presence, no contact for over 3 years. The children barely remember him. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, but then leaned forward, his voice cutting in. That's not true. I wrote letters. Letters? Maria's lawyer snapped. Show them, Daniel faltered. His lawyer cleared his throat, quickly changing direction. Mr. Alvarez acknowledges his absence. But he is here now, ready to make amends, ready to be the father these children need. The judge's eyes narrowed, unimpressed. Ethan, seated behind Maria, leaned forward. His hand brushed the back of her chair, steady, grounding. Maria didn't turn, but she felt the strength in that simple gesture. He was here. She wasn't alone. Then came the moment no one expected. Elias, quiet and brave beyond his years, tugged at the bailiff's sleeve. He had slipped into the chamber unnoticed, determined to stand by his mother. Can I talk to the judge? He asked softly. The room stilled. The judge, startled, looked down at the boy. You understand this is serious, son? Elias nodded solemnly. Yes, sir. But I need to say something. For me and my sister. The bailiff guided him forward. Maria's heart nearly stopped as she watched her son disappear into the judge's chambers with a clerk. 10 minutes passed. 10 endless minutes in which Maria's pulse thundered in her ears, every nightmare flashing before her eyes. What if Daniel had poisoned them? What if Elias had been too scared to speak the truth? When they returned, the boy's small face was pale but resolute. He went straight to Maria, gripping her hand. The judge cleared his throat, his voice firm. "I have heard enough." Effective immediately, Mr. Alvarez is granted only supervised visitation, 1 hour per month, contingent upon successful rehabilitation and parental counseling. "Full custody remains with Ms. Alvarez," Daniel exploded, slamming his hands on the table. "This is corruption. She's using him," he shouted, pointing at Ethan. "She's sleeping her way into money and power." Ethan rose, his presence commanding the room. His voice was calm, dangerously calm. "You abandoned them, Daniel. Don't you dare twist this. You will not hurt them again." Security moved swiftly, pulling Daniel back as he raged and cursed, his polished mask shattered for all to see. Maria clutched Elias to her chest, relief flooding her, tears spilling despite herself. But even as Daniel was dragged out, Ethan knew this battle wasn't over. Men like Daniel never gave up quietly. There would be whispers, accusations, attempts to claw back what he had lost. And the world beyond these walls, the tabloids, the boardrooms. The vultures would eat the story alive. As they left the courthouse, Emma ran into Maria's arms, burying her face against her mother's coat. Ethan bent down to Elias, looking the boy in the eye. "You were brave in there. Braver than most men I know." Elias nodded, his voice small but steady. "I just told the truth. Daddy scares us. Mommy doesn't. It was easy." Ethan's chest tightened, pride and fury and protectiveness tangling inside him. He glanced at Maria, who was trembling under the weight of everything that had just unfolded. She met his eyes, her lips parting as though to thank him, but no words came. In that silence, Ethan made a vow, not aloud, not yet, but in his heart. This family, fragile and scarred as it was, would not face the storm alone. He would stand between them and the darkness, no matter the cost. But deep down he sensed the truth. The courtroom was only the beginning. Outside, reporters already swarmed the steps, cameras flashing like lightning, hungry for scandal. Suspense hung thick in the icy air. The battle had been won today, but the war for Maria's children and for her dignity was far from over. Snowflakes spun in the air outside the courthouse, but inside the storm was louder. Reporters swarmed like vultures, their microphones and cameras flashing, their voices overlapping in a frenzy. "Ms. Alvarez, is it true you manipulated the CEO into helping you? Mr. Cole, are you in a relationship with your maid? Did you buy the custody ruling?" Ethan shoved through them, his arm firm around Maria as if his body alone could shield her. The twins clung to her coat wide-eyed, their earlier relief erased by the chaos outside. He could feel Maria trembling, not from cold but from humiliation. She had fought so hard to stay invisible all these years, and now every eye in the city was on her. They made it to the car, slamming the doors shut as the tinted windows swallowed the flashing lights. Inside, silence pressed like a weight. Maria sat stiffly, clutching Emma and Elias, her eyes glassy. Ethan reached for her hand, but she pulled it back, whispering, "This is worse than Daniel. He's gone, but this doesn't stop." She was right. By the time they reached the penthouse, the story was everywhere. News alerts, gossip sites, viral threads. A single headline burned across every screen. "Gold digger or survivor? Maid caught in billionaire's web." And beneath it, photos, grainy shots of Maria at past charity events, always in the background, always watching. To strangers, it painted her as obsessive, as calculated. They didn't see the truth, that she had worked those events, scrubbing tables, carrying trays, hoping for overtime pay. Maria's phone buzzed relentlessly. Unknown numbers, voicemails dripping with venom. "You ruined him. You're a leech. Go back where you belong." She silenced it. But the messages kept finding her, emails, comments. Strangers who suddenly thought they owned her story. That night, the penthouse felt less like sanctuary and more like a prison surrounded by invisible eyes. Maria stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself, watching the snow fall while the city whispered lies about her. Ethan approached quietly, but she didn't turn. "They won't stop," she said flatly. "They'll twist everything until people believe it. That I trapped you. That I wanted this. And what do you want?" he asked, his voice low, steady. Her eyes flicked to the twins asleep on the couch with a blanket wrapped tight around them. "I want them safe. I want them to have a life where they aren't ashamed of who their mother is. And right now," her voice broke. "Right now I'm their biggest threat." The words gutted him. Ethan crossed the distance, placing a hand on her shoulder. "No. The threat is the world that wants to make you small. You are not the danger, Maria. You're the reason they're alive." But she shook her head, tears burning her eyes. "You don't understand. They'll go after you too. Your board, your investors, they won't tolerate this scandal. They'll tell you to cut me out to save yourself. And maybe you should, before it destroys everything you've built." Ethan studied her, the fierce determination in her voice even as she broke apart. He realized then that she wasn't pushing him away for herself, she was pushing him away to protect him, too, and that only made him more certain. The next morning, the attack escalated. Daniel's family, desperate for leverage, appeared on television. His stepmother, Patricia, sat before cameras, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Maria destroyed my son," she sobbed. He tried to reconnect, but she turned the children against him. She seduced a rich man and made sure Daniel had no place in their lives. Now he's gone, and my grandchildren are poisoned against their father's memory. The words hit like a hammer. Maria collapsed onto the couch, her face buried in her hands. Emma clutched at her, confused. "Mommy, why are they saying bad things? Why do they hate us?" Ethan's blood boiled. He could almost hear his boardroom already. The phone calls, the panic. In fact, it came within the hour. The chairman's voice crackled through the line. "Ethan, this is bad. Stocks are wobbling. Investors are nervous. You need to distance yourself from her. Publicly." Ethan stared at the glass wall of his office, where Maria sat holding the twins close as if she could shield them from a world set on tearing them apart. His answer came without hesitation. "No," the chairman sputtered. "No? Ethan, this could cost you everything." "Then let it," Ethan said, his voice like steel. "If this empire can't survive me telling the truth, then it was never worth anything." He hung up before they could argue. That evening, Maria found him pacing the living room, his jaw tight, his phone buzzing with unanswered calls. She approached quietly, her voice raw. "You don't have to do this. You don't have to burn your life down for us." He turned sharply, his eyes blazing. "Maria, look at me. I am not burning my life down. I am finally living it." Suspense hung thick in the room, every unspoken word hovering between them. The storm outside raged in headlines, in cameras, in whispers. But inside, something else was building. Something neither of them could contain much longer. Ethan stepped closer, his voice lower now, almost a vow. "Tomorrow, I'll face them. Not with spin, not with silence, with the truth. And if they want to come for me, let them. But they won't touch you, or your children. Not while I have breath in me." Maria stared at him, her tears spilling freely now. She wanted to believe, wanted to let herself collapse into the safety he promised. But in the pit of her stomach, fear twisted like a knife, because she knew the truth. Once the world turned on you, it never truly stopped, and she couldn't shake the question that haunted her as snow fell heavy outside. Would his power be enough to protect them, or would this be the storm that consumed them all? The headlines didn't stop. Every news channel, every gossip feed, every blog carried Maria's name like a curse. By the third week of January, the penthouse no longer felt like a home. It felt like a glass cage under siege. Protesters gathered outside, chanting accusations. Anonymous letters slid under the door. Once someone spray-painted "Gold Digger" across the entrance to the parking garage. For the twins, it was worse. Emma clung to her mother, asking if Grandma Patricia would take them away. Elias stopped sleeping, terrified that men with cameras would come in the night. Maria did everything to soothe them, but the shadows under her eyes deepened until she looked like a ghost. Ethan couldn't take it anymore. On a bleak, snowy morning, he stood by the window, staring at the mob of reporters below, then turned to Maria. "Pack your things," he said quietly. She blinked at him. "What? Why?" Because this ends today, he said, his jaw tight. We're leaving Chicago. She laughed bitterly, hugging her arms to her chest. Leaving? Where do you think we can go that they won't follow? They'll chase this story until we're nothing but broken pieces. But Ethan's gaze was steady, his tone calm and absolute. There's a place. My grandfather's house in Vermont, small town. No paparazzi, no boardrooms, no vultures. Just air, trees, and people who don't care about the Cole name. If we stay here, they'll destroy you. If we leave, maybe we get to be a family without the world deciding what that means. Maria froze at the word. Family. She wanted to argue, to remind him she wasn't his responsibility, but her children's hollow eyes haunted her. At last she whispered, When do we go? Tonight. The journey out of the city felt like a covert escape. Cars with tinted windows, back routes through icy streets, a driver Ethan trusted with his life. The twins huddled in the back seat, whispering excitedly about snow and trees, innocent to the weight of what was being left behind. Maria pressed her forehead against the cold window, watching the skyline fade. She should have felt relief, but fear gnawed at her. What if Vermont was just another trap? What if peace was an illusion? After hours of silence and endless white roads, they arrived. The house sat on 5 acres, a colonial with peeling paint and a wraparound porch surrounded by rolling hills blanketed in snow. It wasn't perfect, not like Ethan's penthouse. But the moment Emma and Elias tumbled out of the car and began running through the snow, laughing for the first time in weeks, Maria felt something stir inside her, a fragile spark of hope. The town itself welcomed them cautiously. At first, neighbors dropped by with casseroles and polite curiosity. When word trickled out about who they were, Maria braced for the whispers to start again. But instead, the local store owner, an elderly woman named Martha, said firmly, This town's seen enough outsiders chased out. You're here now. That's enough. Her words spread and slowly walls began to fall. Days blurred into a new rhythm. Maria helped the twins settle into the small school. Ethan set up his office in the basement, running his empire remotely, his tie traded for sweaters and boots. For the first time, he woke not to emails and deadlines, but to the sound of children racing downstairs. Evenings were filled with dinners around a wooden table, with laughter echoing against walls that had long been silent. But peace never lasted long in Ethan Cole's life. One evening, as the fire cracked in the hearth and the twins worked on a puzzle on the floor, headlights swept across the snow. A car door slammed. Maria stiffened instantly, her arms going around the children. Ethan rose, his instincts sharp, his heart pounding. The man who stepped onto the porch looked older than Ethan remembered. Thin, gray at the temples, his once commanding presence dimmed. Yet the sight of him hit like a punch. Father, Ethan said, his voice ice. Charles Cole's eyes glistened, though his face was gaunt. Ethan, he rasped. I had to come. Maria's breath caught. She knew the stories. How Charles had walked away from Ethan and his mother when Ethan was just a boy, chasing a new family, leaving his son to grow up in a world of money and absence. The man who had abandoned him now stood on their doorstep, shivering in the Vermont cold. What do you want? Ethan asked flatly, blocking the doorway. Charles's shoulders sagged. Time. I don't have much left. Cancer. 3 months, maybe 4. I want to know you, son. I want to meet them. His eyes flicked to Emma and Elias, peering out from behind Maria's skirt. My grandchildren. The room froze. The twins stared, confused. Maria's stomach knotted. Another man claiming rights to her children. Another storm at their door. She braced for Ethan to slam it shut, to cast him out like the ghost he was. But Ethan's jaw worked, torn between fury and something deeper, something raw. He was still that boy, watching his father pack bags, waiting for him to look back. The wound had never healed. He finally spoke, his voice low. Dangerous. 3 months, you say. You can visit. You can know them. But if you hurt them even once, you'll wish you never set foot here. Charles nodded, tears sliding down his weathered face. Maria's heart raced as she pulled the twins close. Vermont had promised safety, but already ghosts of the past were clawing at their fragile peace. The snow outside was pure and silent, but inside the house, a storm had only just begun. The hills of Vermont were greening with the first warmth of spring, and the house that once felt like a hiding place was now alive with sound. Children's laughter spilled out of the open windows, carried on the breeze along with the scent of wildflowers. The twins darted across the yard chasing a kite Ethan had bought them, their voices echoing like bells. For weeks the town had slowly pulled them into its embrace, neighbors arriving with pies, invitations to Sunday picnics, quiet nods of acceptance. Maria still carried the weight of fear in her chest, but here, for the first time, fear didn't outweigh hope. And yet, for every moment of peace, shadows lurked. Charles Cole had kept his promise. The man Ethan once called father came each week, thinner every time, his coughs deeper, his face drawn with the sickness eating him alive. He told the twins stories about magic tricks and card games, taught them to shuffle decks and laugh at sleight of hand. To them, he was a grandfather, fragile but kind. To Maria, he was a question she could never answer. Could a man who had abandoned his son earn forgiveness in his last days? It was Ethan who surprised her most. The guarded CEO who once lived behind glass and steel was now a man who walked barefoot through grass, who cooked pancakes with Elias on his shoulders, who built a treehouse plank by plank with Emma offering instructions from below. Each night he grew less like the figure the world called a billionaire, and more like what he really was, a man desperate to build the family he never thought he'd have. Still, Maria resisted. Every time his hand brushed hers, every time his gaze lingered, she felt the old alarm scream inside her. Men who promised forever always left. Men who swore to protect ended up hurting. She couldn't risk her children's fragile hearts, until the night Emma asked in that guileless voice only a child could have, "Mommy, why can't Ethan be our daddy?" Maria froze, spoon halfway to her lips. Ethan looked up, stunned, his fork clattering to the plate. Elias, too, spoke, his small voice shy. "He already takes care of us. Daddy never did. Why can't we just keep him?" Maria had no answer. Her heart thundered. She wanted to silence them, to dismiss it as childish fantasy. But she couldn't, because deep down she wanted it too. 2 weeks later, the decision was made for her. Ethan called the townspeople together, every neighbor who had opened their doors and hearts. He stood in the backyard of his grandfather's old house, the mountains rising behind him, and with Maria at his side, he announced what they had both feared and longed for. "I'm going to marry her, and not in some ballroom under chandeliers, not with photographers waiting outside. Here, among the people who gave us shelter when the world tried to bury us." Maria's breath caught. He hadn't asked her. He hadn't needed to. When she looked at him, when she saw the raw honesty in his eyes, she realized the answer had been yes long before he spoke the words. Preparations moved quickly, almost too quickly. It was the town's idea. Simple, honest, nothing like the opulence of Chicago. Wildflowers picked from fields, lanterns strung from branches, a dress borrowed from a neighbor who had worn it decades ago, fitted by gentle hands that whispered, "You deserve this happiness, child." On the morning of the ceremony, Maria stood before the mirror, her growing belly just beginning to show. Fear whispered again. What if she ruined him? What if the media found them, dragged this life back into the fire? But then Emma slipped her small hand into hers and whispered, "You look like a princess, Mommy, and princesses don't run away." In the backyard, under the canopy of trees and sky, Ethan waited. Charles, thinner than ever but proud, offered his arm to Maria. "Take care of my son," he murmured. "Give him the family I never could." His eyes brimmed as he placed her hand in Ethan's. The vows were not polished speeches, not rehearsed promises. They were raw. Ethan's voice shook when he said, "You saved me from myself, from a life of walls and emptiness. You and these children are my reason for everything. I promise to love you through garbage and gold, through storms and silence, through every scar we carry." Maria's tears spilled as she whispered back, "You gave me back hope. You showed my children what safety feels like. I promise to love you not for your name, not for your wealth, but for your heart. Because in your heart we finally found home. When their lips met, the twins raced forward, wrapping their arms around them both, shouting, "Now we're a real family." The crowd cheered, lanterns flickered, and for a fleeting moment the world outside could not touch them. But as night fell, Ethan stood alone on the porch, staring into the dark. He knew Storm still lingered. The media would never stop looking. Enemies from his world would never forgive his choice. And somewhere in the distance, Patricia Williams still schemed, sharpening her knives. Behind him, Maria called softly, "Come inside. They're asking for you." He turned, and for once the fear in his chest quieted, because no matter what came, this was worth every fight. The wedding was not an ending. It was the beginning of a battle more dangerous than either of them had faced before. And as the stars burned bright over Vermont, Ethan Cole knew one truth with unshakable certainty. He would burn the world to ashes before he let it take this family from him. The lanterns from the wedding still swayed in the Vermont night, their light soft against the dark fields. The music had faded, the guests gone home, and Emma and Elias had fallen asleep in a heap of ribbons and wildflower crowns. Maria carried them inside with Ethan's help, her heart still racing from the vows, from the kiss, from the unshakable sense that, for the first time in years, her life wasn't just surviving. It was beginning, but beginnings had a way of dragging old ghosts back from the grave. At dawn, the world intruded. Ethan's phone buzzed, urgent, angry, relentless. Headlines screamed across every screen. Gold digger's 20-year obsession, was this marriage a con? The story broke with surgical precision. Grainy photos from charity events over the years, Maria in the background, always working, always watching. Twisted captions painted her as a stalker who had tracked Ethan since childhood, laying a trap to ensnare a billionaire. Maria saw it on the kitchen television, her coffee forgotten as bile rose in her throat. She wanted to rip the screen off the wall. "They've made it look like I hunted you," she whispered, her voice hoarse, breaking. "Like every step of my life was just waiting for this." Emma wandered in, sleepy-eyed, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Mommy, the kids at school said you tricked Ethan, that we're just pretending to be a family for money." Maria collapsed against the counter, her hand over her mouth. Ethan snatched the remote and killed the screen. Fury pulsed through him, but beneath it was something else, an unease he couldn't voice, because buried under the lies was a piece of truth, and Maria had never told him. That night, when the twins were asleep and the house was quiet, Maria sat across from him, her fingers twisting the ring on her hand. Her eyes shimmered with fear and exhaustion. "There's something I should have told you long ago," she began, her voice trembling. Ethan tensed. "Maria." She swallowed hard. "I wasn't digging through that dumpster by accident. I knew whose building it was. I knew it was yours." The words struck like ice. Ethan's chest tightened, 1,000 thoughts racing. She hurried on before he could speak. 20 years ago, when I was 12, my mother was dying of cancer. We had no money. We were weeks from losing everything. And then your grandfather's foundation stepped in, paid for treatments, bought us time, 2 months we wouldn't have had. It didn't save her, but it gave us goodbye. That mattered. It mattered more than anything." Ethan froze, memory flashing, sterile hospital halls, his grandfather's stern hand on his shoulder. A girl in a butterfly hair clip sitting with a worn paperback, eyes too old for her age. He remembered fumbling in his pocket, pulling out the Game Boy he never went anywhere without. "Here, take this. It helps me when I'm sad." He had forgotten it the next day, buried it under the blur of a lonely childhood. But she had carried it for decades. Maria's tears fell freely now. "I was that girl. I never forgot your kindness. I told myself if I ever saw you again, I'd thank you. And then, years later, there you were. This man who didn't even know I existed, living in the glass tower above me. I didn't know how to approach you. I didn't want to beg. I wanted to stand on my own. But that night on Christmas Eve, I was out of options. I prayed for a miracle, and it was you." Again, Ethan sat back, the air stolen from his lungs. The world was suddenly sharper, harsher. "So it's true," he whispered, his voice raw. "You knew me. You knew exactly what you were doing." Maria shook her head violently. "Not like that. Not like they say. I wasn't plotting to trap you. Ethan, I was desperate. I wanted to believe kindness still existed. I never asked for anything. I would have gone home with garbage in my bag if you hadn't come down." Silence stretched, thick with doubt and pain. Ethan rose, pacing the room. He could hear the headlines in his head. She planned it. She waited years. She snared the cold air. And yet, he looked at her, at the woman who had fought for her children with fire in her bones, and he saw truth in her eyes. "You should have told me," he said finally, his voice breaking. "Before the world told me for you." Maria's shoulders sagged, defeat written in every line of her body. "I was afraid you wouldn't believe me. Afraid you'd see me the way they want you to, as a fraud." He stopped in front of her, his hands on the table, his face inches from hers. "And what do you see yourself as, Maria?" Her eyes lifted, shimmering, unflinching despite her tears. "I see myself as a mother who did everything she could to keep her children alive. And I see myself as the girl you once gave hope to when she had none." The fire in his chest shifted, softened, transformed. He saw her again, the girl with the butterfly clip clutching the Game Boy like it was treasure. And suddenly the last piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This wasn't a con. This wasn't fate's trick. It was a thread that had been weaving them together for decades, invisible until now. Ethan's hand closed over hers. "You were the girl," he whispered, awe in his voice. "All this time it was you." For the first time in days, Maria let herself cry without restraint. But outside, the storm gathered. Patricia Williams had vanished from the cameras, but whispers said she was preparing her final strike. And in Chicago, Ethan's enemies smelled blood, ready to use this revelation to tear him apart. The past had bound them together. The future was still a battlefield, and as the Vermont night deepened,